This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
"29 killed in 2 deadly attacks in Burkina Faso." First post-Bashir cabinet sworn in as nation moves to civilian rule. And annual robot Olympiad showcasing design solutions held in Egypt. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. British airports pilots in an unprecedented 48-hour strike grounding all flights. And in sports, neighbors Kenya and Uganda play out a 1-1 draw in an international friendly match in Nairobi. We begin the bulletin in Burkina Faso's troubled north, where at least 29 people have been killed in 2 separate incidents. A truck transporting people and goods is said to have rode over an improvised explosive device, leaving 15 passengers dead, most of them traders. In the second hit, 14 people lost their lives when their convoy carrying food to displaced people was targeted and attacked. Officials say military reinforcements have been deployed to the area. The West African country's army has also been increasingly targeted by rebels. The rebellion, which originated in neighboring Mali, has left the country's government struggling to contain its spread from the country's north to east. All right, let's now get the latest from Deji Badmas is live for us in Lagos. So, Deji, what can you tell us about these 2 attacks in Burkina Faso?
Well, Peninah, these 2 attacks actually happened in 2 communities that are just 50 kilometers apart. The first one actually happened in a place known as Basalowo, where these 15 persons were killed on a truck. And then the second one, of course, happened in another place called San Matenga, where 14 persons were killed. And that most of those who were killed in the attack in San Matenga now were basically drivers. I mean, taking food now to displaced people. The foods, most of the food items now were being conveyed on tricycles. So the tricycle drivers were actually hit. No one has actually claimed, no group has claimed responsibility for the attack. But of course, every finger is pointing at the different jihadist groups that are operating around northern Burkina Faso, especially around the border area, because we've seen these groups now carry out attacks of this nature in the past. So everyone believes the attack was actually carried by some of these jihadist groups, but none of them, of course, has claimed responsibility. I guess that would happen sooner than later. But of course, the government says it has deployed reinforcement to the region, and no arrest, of course, has been made. There's been no announcement of any arrest made at all. Its government needs to do more than it is doing now to prevent attacks like this from happening.
Yeah, it does seem the government, Deji, is struggling to deal with this rebellion. It's now moved from the north to the east. Why is it seemingly a challenge for the Burkina Faso government to actually contain these attacks?
First is, we're talking about a country that is very poor, one of the poorest in the world and the poorest in the region. And part of the reason why it's also struggling is that you just have to take your mind back to when the former president was there. I'm talking about Blaise Compaoré. He had a very strong military at that time, especially the presidential, well, the presidential guard now, so to speak, headed by his personal chief of staff. It was quite strong. I mean, in terms of intelligence gathering and all of that. Of course, as you know, when he left power, that presidential guard, so to speak, was disbanded, and most of the members were actually dismissed from the military. And from that time on, Burkina Faso has not been able to really organize its military to the force, the strong force it used to be. So that, of course, is a problem, no doubt about that. Then in terms of development now, part of the problem you have is that there are too many ungoverned spaces in Burkina Faso. Well, it's a very poor country. How much can the government do? So where you have these ungoverned spaces, especially in the north, is a problem, because some of these jihadist group will definitely step in and begin to provide an alternative government of their own. That's part of what they would be discussing, how to coordinate their response now to the fight against terrorism, because that coordination has been lacking for quite a while. But the truth of the matter, Peninah, is that Burkina Faso cannot deal with this alone. It's just the truth. It hasn't got the military might. It hasn't got the resources to deal with this. It would need the assistance of the region. And what we expect is that when that meeting happens on the 14th of September, the leaders of the region will be able to come up with a comprehensive strategy now in terms of how to assist Burkina Faso and then deal with the crisis in Mali and deal with the crisis affecting the entire Sahel region now. It's very important because fact is that the jihadis are growing in influence almost on a daily basis. And if something is not done, we're going to see these attacks escalate and, of course, extend to even places where you do not expect that attacks would happen.
All right, Deji, thank you very much for that. Deji Badmas live in Lagos. Now, former President Robert Mugabe's remains are due to be returned to Zimbabwe on Wednesday for an official burial. Several heads of state have been invited to attend the two-day ceremony, which is scheduled to take place over the weekend. Although Robert Mugabe's blotched legacy led to his forced resignation, he is still regarded by many as a national hero.
The former president of Zimbabwe died in Singapore on Friday last week and is due to be buried on Sunday. Locals living in settlements around Harare have reacted with great sadness and regret at the death of Robert Mugabe.
Yeah, he was just a friend. When he came here, every child would go there and greet him. He was a good man. So I think it's a great loss to us. He was just a father of everyone. When you meet him, you know you have met someone who used to encourage you what to do.
Mugabe enjoyed backing from Zimbabwe's people after taking over in 1980.
I'm a young man from the slum, and I was inspired by our father, the former President Mugabe, because he is our liberator. We grew up in peace because he made sure there is no war in our country. The people from the ghetto are inspired by him, and so we say, rest in peace.
Even with the proven loyalty, decades of repression, economic mismanagement and allegations of election rigging watered down this support. Emerson Mnangagwa, a former ally turned foe, now struggles to institute strategies that will ensure sustainable growth that will revive the economy. A reality that leads many to memorialize a past they feel was easier to bear.
In Zimbabwe, life was easier during his time. Teachers, soldiers, police and civil servants were given better services because they were getting good salaries with which they could sustain themselves.
In death, Mugabe received praise from former political and military allies who propped up his rule for close to 4 decades before forcing him out. The ex-guerrilla leader became Zimbabwe's first leader following independence from white minority rule in 1980 and held on to power until he was forced to resign in 2017. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Well, Zimbabwe will hold a state funeral for former President Robert Mugabe this Saturday, the 14th, before a burial ceremony following day, Sunday, the 15th. That's according to a government memo. The funeral will be in Harare's National Sports Stadium. CGTN's Farai Mokutuya is live in Harare, and he joins us now for more. Farai, what is the latest on President Mugabe's burial arrangements?
What we do know is that a private jet that is traveling from Harare today, going to Singapore to pick up his body, accompany his body back here. Accompanying, that body will be officials that are leaving Harare today. They include the vice president, one of the vice presidents, Kembo Mohadi, senior government officials, members of the Mugabe family, as well as chiefs from the Zimba clan from which he hailed. They will be traveling to Singapore today, and they will be returning returning on Wednesday afternoon with his body, which will then be taken to his rural home.
All right, I'm afraid we've lost Farai Mokutuya. We'll try and reconnect with him to get more details on that story. Let's move on to Sudan. The first cabinet since the oust of President Omar al-Bashir was sworn in as the African country transitions to a civilian rule following nationwide protests that overthrew the autocrat. The cabinet led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, which includes 4 women, took oath at the presidential palace in Khartoum. It is expected to steer the daily affairs of the country during a transition period of 39 months. The lineup was formed after Sudan last month swore in a sovereign council, a joint civilian military ruling body that aims to oversee the transition. The 18 ministers were seen greeting members of the sovereign council, including its chief general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, in images broadcast by state television from the palace. The council itself is the result of a power-sharing deal between the protesters and generals who had seized power after the army ousted Bashir in April. All right, so we have finally reconnected with the Farai Mokutuya. He joins us again in Harare. Farai, it's good to have you back. You were talking to us about the arrangements to have the body of Mugabe back into the country.
Yes, indeed, Peninah. I was saying that a private jet that will bring his body back will leave Harare today. On board will be one of the vice presidents, senior government officials, as well as family members of the Mugabe family. And they will travel back on Wednesday afternoon. When his body arrives, it will be taken to his rural home in Zimba. And then there will be that state funeral, as you mentioned, on Saturday at the National Sports Stadium. And then the burial, which will happen on Sunday, the 15th.
All right, so you mentioned the burial on Sunday the 15th, Farai. There seems to be a bit of a tussle between the government and the family on the other hand on where Mugabe will be laid to rest. Talk to us about that. What's the official position?
Well, no official position as yet because there need to be consultations between the family as well as the government. Whenever someone is declared a national hero, ordinarily they will be given a state funeral and buried at the national hero's shrine. Now, in the recent past, there have been circumstances where people had before they died, had made special requests, or their families have special requests where they want their loved ones to be buried in their rural village or a specific location, but they are still accorded the hero status, but then not laid to rest at the hero's acre. So we understand at this point and over the weekend there have been these negotiations and consultations between the family and the government as to where the former president will be laid to rest. So no official position as yet. What we do know is, as I mentioned, Sunday will be the burial. The location is what's still unknown at this point in time.
All right, so just 6 days away to that burial, Farai. Why does it matter though where Mugabe is laid to rest? Why is it important?
Well, I think, depending on where you look at it, I mean, first of all, as a national hero, many would expect that he would be buried at this national hero's shrine. He presided over a number of funerals there himself. It is a place where the icons, the heroes of the liberation struggle are laid to rest. It is a place, that many people hold in very high esteem. And it is something that, it received that status because of the party. ZANU-PF gave it that status. Former President Mugabe himself gave it that status because he and his party were responsible for deciding who was laid to rest there. And it was a location for very elite people within the liberation history of Zimbabwe. So many would expect that he would be buried there. There have been rumors, very unfounded because his family has disputed them, that the former president had said that he doesn't want to be buried there. So, I think people are looking at it and saying, look, could it be because of the fallout between him and his former allies in November 2017 that he's saying now he doesn't want to be buried there? But as his family said over the weekend, his nephew, who's the family spokesperson, refuted those claims, said the former president didn't say anything to that effect. So I think that is why there's so much intrigue around it. Could it signal that, he was still unhappy about what happened to him? But, as I said, these negotiations, these consultations are still going on, and hopefully in the next few days, certainly, in the next day or two, we will know exactly where that is taking place, the burial.
Hopefully so, Farai. Thank you for that update, Farai Mokutuya in Harare. Now, in the wake of the upcoming presidential elections in Tunisia on September 15th, the debate on female representation has once again been brought into the spotlight. Only 2 women out of 26 candidates will be running for the top seat in the country, with both of them largely absent from the ongoing campaigns. CGTN's Brent Toussaint reports.
In the days preceding this year's presidential elections in Tunisia, women are nowhere to be seen. They have been largely absent from the campaigns, which has focused heavily on security and economic issues. Nor are they well represented in the large pool of presidential hopefuls, with just 2 women standing out of 26 candidates.
In the Tunisian mentality, we do not vote for women. The example of Samia Abu, who in a particular month last year was, according to polls, at the top of the list of politicians in whom Tunisians had the most confidence in. In the same month, surveys on the willingness of Tunisians to vote for Samia Abu placed her at the bottom of the list.
Tunisia has been considered relatively progressive on women's rights in the Arab and Muslim world since its independence in the 1950s. Beji Caid Essebsi, Tunisia's first president elected democratically, oversaw the passing of several key texts affecting women. These include a law on violence against women and the repeal of a circular banning women from marrying non-Muslims.
It is not a luxury to continue the fight. It is always in relation to us. In fact, in relation to our desire to be in the public realm, in the political, social and economic realm. So yes, and we must continue. It is an obligation.
How many governments have we seen? 6 or 7? How many female ministers? No more than 15. In the current government, there are 3 of them, although there are more than 30 ministers. And if we count the secretaries of state, there are 40, with only 5 of them being women. Now, that's a shame. The number of women does not exceed 10%.
Lawyer Bochra Belhab Hamida, who was elected to parliament in 2014, says she is stepping back from politics without any regrets. While in office, Hamida helped spearhead an inheritance equality law, facing fierce backlash from some sides for her position on the hotly debated issue. Hamida often collided with the aggression of young men that did not understand her fight for equality. The sometimes taxing environment can dissuade engagement. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Meanwhile, at least 50 migrants on an overcrowded rubber boat have been rescued by charity ship Ocean Viking, some 14 nautical miles from Libya. The rescue took place following receipt of an email by Alarm Phone, a hotline for migrants calling for help. As per maritime law, the charity ship is calling on the Libyan, Italian and Maltese authorities to provide a safe place to disembark the rescue migrants.
I want to thank God, and frankly, I'm so happy. We are so happy to have left Libya. We were not well in Libya. We were suffering in that country.
This is Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Straight ahead. President Ramaphosa calls for prayers to restore calm in South Africa. And annual Robot Olympiad showcasing design solutions held in Egypt.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed, and this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
to South Africa now, where a fresh outburst of xenophobic attacks in Johannesburg has left at least one person dead, injuring 5 others. Sunday's violence is the latest in a series of anti-migrant attacks in the country, with reprisal attacks witnessed in Nigeria. At least 10 people have so far been killed in the attacks, which have sparked protests in several other African nations. Meanwhile, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned the attacks, with the police insisting the situation had been brought under control. Meanwhile, communities and religious organizations across the country have heeded a presidential call for prayer to restore calm in South Africa. The nation has been rocked by a spate of xenophobic attacks and the murders of several women and children over the last week. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
A moment of silence for the victims of gender-based violence. Among them, university students Unene Umhuetiana, Jesse Hess and champion South African boxer Lee Andre Jegos, killed in the last week alone. They're part of a growing list of women whose lives have been prematurely ended.
The time for silence and for tolerating abuse is gone. The church is also complicit in the propagation of patriarchal systems. So in a way, we are directly challenged to reform ourselves as well. And if we miss opportunities that make themselves available in this way, as sad as it seems in our country, then we're not a reflecting and a praying society. So we're bringing men, women together, young children, old children, because we're having this conversation with everybody.
Following mass protests in Cape Town this week, President Cyril Ramaphosa called for maximum sentences for perpetrators. The women say this isn't enough to protect them in their homes or on the streets.
As women who are taking even a man's role in raising these kids, in conscientizing them about the oneness that we're supposed to have, and now you are scared of even leaving your home, you're scared of allowing your child to go to school with the fear that they may not come back.
I don't feel safe at all because I have been through this. Someday I went to school and some 2 guys tried to rob me. I was very scared. I'm not even comfortable around guys, old men, and some are my uncle I need to respect. But now, as girls, we don't feel safe at all.
To the men of South Africa, that we should respect our women, our mothers, our daughters, and we shouldn't do any harm to them to make them feel very unsafe at their home.
In the last few days, South Africans have taken to the streets to condemn gender-based violence. They have also come together to pray for hundreds of women and children who have been raped and killed over the years. These are important steps towards healing and uniting a nation that simply has had enough of violence. Julie Shire, CGTN, Soweto, South Africa.
Fashion Without Borders is Africa's glamorous fashion showcase featuring some of Africa's hottest and upcoming designers. It's a fashion and lifestyle movement that started in South Africa and is now traveling across the African continent to find young and emerging models from disadvantaged backgrounds. CGTN's Lisa Njamela has more.
The theme for this year's Fashion Without Borders event is My Africa.
Fashion Without Borders bring across all kinds of creatives from the continent to share content and ideas on the catwalk.
Young and emerging designers from across the continent showcase their talent. Upcoming models then strut the designs on the fashion ramps. 20 fashion designers and 40 models from across the continent showcased their wear here, and they appreciate this platform provided for them.
The Fashion Without Borders gives us the opportunity to showcase our garments, our talents, not only in South Africa, but all over the world in Africa, as our team is My Africa. So we are excited as Africans and showcase my talents, everything that I create.
We are here to market our brand. That's the opportunity. Nothing to stop us. South Africa to us is just home.
The platform also presents an opportunity for young people to deal with social issues.
I think the space and the whole concept currently at the moment is actually quite a necessity
You know, considering what is happening now, there's Afrophobia, there's xenophobia, and now there's actually fashion without borders. You know, showcasing fashion from every different corners of this continent, which is Africa. So for us, actually, it's a good space for us to be here. We're proud actually to be here.
Fashion Without Borders is now in its 5th year running and has been growing with each year ever since. Yodisa Njamala for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt has held its annual robot competition. The event brings young brains together as they team up to design solutions using robots. Winners from Egypt get to represent the country in global competitions. The competition is part of several independent initiatives to boost robotic knowledge among the youth in the country. CGTN's Adel Mahroui has more.
Mariam Tahir and her team are debugging a computer code. They want the robot to make a successful display. It's the first time they joined the Egyptian Robot Olympiad.
I've always had a passion for robots. I always wished to learn how to set up a robot and program it. It's very interesting. I teach myself with trial and error. I learn more. I joined an academy that sponsors us. They provide us with material. I study online, read articles, and watch videos. Then I implement or develop what I learn in the academy.
Robotic education is still not popular in Egypt. Events like this one aim to move stagnant waters in this crucial field of technology.
Unfortunately, we don't have curricula to enrich robotic manufacturing education in Egyptian schools. Technology education in most developing countries only focuses on the use of electronic devices rather than the broader concept of building and manufacturing, to teach students how to use robots to assist them in their education.
الكت بتاعت الروبوت بتاعت الاي في 3 ثمنها بيبقى غالي شويه فنتيجه كده.
The smart robotic processor is very expensive. Most of us don't own it at home. However, there are some institutions that get it and give us the opportunity to experiment with it. We learn things during that process, which I would never get exposed to in my university.
يعني ويبتدوا ان هم يعلموا الناس.
Winners get an enlightening opportunity to participate in the World Robot Olympiad. And for the brilliant, it's an opportunity that could shape their future.
We have many success stories. Students who participated in the Olympiads and have earned scholarships in universities abroad and in Egypt. This kind of competition builds human caliber in the field of robotics.
Organizers this year were thrilled with the participation. It's the first time a team of speech and hearing impaired students joins the event. With sparkling eyes, these youngsters follow their inventions, anxiously waiting for their robots to accomplish their missions. More than 20,000 teams from 60 countries participate in the World Robot Olympiad every year. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Chinese and Egyptian teams have announced the beginning of the implementation phase of their collaborative satellite project funded by China. The two sides signed an agreement in January granting $72 million for the satellite. The Egyptian Satellite Assembly, Integration and Test Center is expected to be fully established this year, where design, assembly and integration works will be carried out. According to the plan, the Egyptian Satellite 2 will be launched by the Chinese side and delivered in orbit after 36 months. The satellite will be used in the fields of marine resource survey, urban planning and meteorological disaster relief in Egypt. Demonstrations in Hong Kong are entering their third month, even after Chief Executive Carrie Lam said last week she would withdraw the controversial fugitive bill that set them off. Earlier, our reporter there, Jordan, gave us the latest on the situation.
Well, although most of the people go to work today, the city is still in chaos as many places erupted violent activities overnight. The entrance to Central Subway Station was set on fire as tensions boiled over during the 14th consecutive week of protest in Hong Kong. Later in the evening, police fired rounds of tear gas to disperse protesters in the busy Causeway Bay shopping district. And the clashes forced many subway stations to close overnight but reopened this morning. The violence has brought a huge economic impact to the city. Retail sales fell 13% year-on-year in July. The number of tourists starting from July has dropped by 31%. While Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam's announcement that she will withdraw the fugitive bill, which initially sparked the protest. Some people say that this is a good signal, while the other demonstrators say the concession is not enough and demand more to be met. The Hong Kong SAR government is working to help businesses deal with the economic downturn associated with the unrest. This comes as the city's PMI, a measure of economic trends in manufacturing, sank to a more than 10-year low in August. Business confidence was also down to its lowest level on record. Government measures include giving new financing support for smaller companies. Loans for a single borrower could reach 6 million Hong Kong dollars with a guarantee period of up to 5 years. The government is also simplifying loan application procedures for its more than 40 funds. These measures come at a total cost of more than 19 billion Hong Kong dollars. Beyond the financial benefits, other moves are targeting areas such as urban renewal and public consultation on hospice care legislation. The People's Republic of China has experienced 3 major eras in the past 70 years. It implemented socialist reform during the New China era, leading to an era of socialist construction. In 1978, China started the new era of economic reform and opening up, building a socialist society with Chinese characteristics. Our reporter Wang Hui explains.
The announcement by Chairman Mao signals a new era for China. After 28 years of war and under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the country defeated the Japanese invaders, overturned the Kuomintang reactionaries, and brought about a new democratic revolution. The People's Republic of China was finally established on October 1st, 2049.
The establishment of the new China ended the fight against imperialism and feudalism in China, abolished unequal treaties imposed by imperialist countries, as well as their privileges in China. It was a great leap from years of feudal autocracy to democracy.
In the next 7 years, the new China accomplished a socialist transformation. The country formed the first People's Congress, drafted a constitution, and established the fundamental system of socialism. It basically set a political and institutional foundation for China's future development. From 1956 to 1978, China went through a period of socialist construction. China successfully tested its first atomic and hydrogen bombs and launched its first artificial satellite. It accomplished significant achievements, but its social and economic campaign, known as Great Leap Forward, failed to achieve favorable results. In 1978, China embraced a critical turning point. Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping started implementing economic reforms and opening up policy in the year. Focusing on economic development, China has been going through an all-round reform since then, striving towards building a socialist country with Chinese characteristics.
China's opening up and economic reform is a great reform in the history of the Chinese nation's development. It is this great reform that pushed forward the great leap of socialism with Chinese characteristics.
China is now the world's second largest economy and the largest manufacturing country. According to the Chinese government, between 1978 and 2018, the country's GDP climbed from 370 billion yuan, or $52 billion to 83 trillion yuan, or $12 trillion. It was increased by 223 times, with an average annual growth rate of 9.5%. People's livelihood also improved remarkably. The number of people living in poverty was cut by 740 million, and the people's annual average disposable income per capita increased from 171 yuan, or $24, to 26,000 yuan, or $3,660. The country also made big progress in its democratic process.
For People's Congress, we have increased the number of representatives from rural areas. The rate of representatives to the population they represent is equal between rural areas and urban areas. In the legal system, we have established the lifelong accountability system for judges to ensure that justice is administered. We have also abolished the rehabilitation through labor system.
China has also become more active on the international stage. It has been promoting the Belt and Road Initiative and aiming at building a community with a shared future for humanity. As the Chinese President Xi Jinping says, the country adheres to the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and the policy of opening up and economic reform. It strives to help people live better lives, contribute more, and dream big. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow, and waterfall surges down from the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up next in business news. British Airways pilots in an unprecedented 48-hour strike grounding all flights. And deepening economic crisis in Zimbabwe causes widespread concern.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
British Airways pilots have begun a 48-hour strike, disrupting the plans of thousands of travellers in an unprecedented industrial action. The British Airline Pilots Association is calling for a larger share of profits, but the airline views their action as unjustifiable. The union has expressed willingness to hold further talks in a bid to resolve the dispute. UK's aviation regulator, Civil Aviation Authority, has called on the airline to advise its customers on their rights. British Airways is expected to offer passengers reimbursement for cancelled flights, alternate travel arrangements under comparable conditions, or a new flight at a later date. Another industrial action has been scheduled for September the 27th.
Well, I don't know how much public support we have. We get a range of mixed messages. What's more important is the pilots are 100% solid. 93% of British Airways pilots voted to go on strike. They're the ones I'm representing in this dispute. They're the ones I'm trying to broker a deal for.
The deepening economic crisis in Zimbabwe is causing widespread concern as a shortage in commodities such as fuel and electricity persists. Despite the government's efforts to improve living conditions, many believe there still is a lot more to be done to curb hyperinflation. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has the details.
The deepening economic crisis in Zimbabwe has rendered harsh living conditions for citizens. There is widespread poverty and unemployment. Some key factors, including the unavailability of running water and sufficient electricity, are hurting all sectors of the economy.
We are suffering here in Zimbabwe. We don't have water, we don't have electricity, even jobs. We don't have jobs here in Zimbabwe. We are suffering. As you can see, I'm just scruffy and dirty. We don't have water even to bath. We come here even at 2 a.m. dye the bowl to fetch water, so it's not easy life here in Zimbabwe.
In early 2019, Zimbabwe scrapped its official 1-to-1 peg between its quasi-currency bond note and the US dollar, paving way for the transitional currency, the RTGS dollar. This also initiated the move by the government to ditch the multi-currency system and declare the RTGS dollar the sole legal tender. However, due to the increase in the cost of living, the bond note has not gained traction with Zimbabweans who still opt for the US dollar as their preferred currency.
When we are buying products for sale, we use local bond note currency, and they don't accept coins. After finishing trading, I have to look for US dollars to get these potatoes, which I use to produce chips. These things are not really normal for businesses.
Lack of access to basic amenities is not the only concern for Zimbabweans. The country also faces shortages of commodities, which has driven inflation even higher. Fuel prices in the country have also skyrocketed, adding to price pressure, especially as rolling electricity cuts are forcing businesses to use expensive diesel generators to power their operations.
People spend anything between maybe an hour to 4 hours queuing for fuel. And what does that do on productivity? Because people are leaving their jobs to actually come into these queues. So I think, companies are actually losing out on productivity.
Many Zimbabweans have taken to the streets in recent weeks to express their discontent at the deteriorating economy. Hyperinflation has steadily increased despite austerity measures introduced by President Emmerson Mnangagwa being put in place. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Scientists say a giant floating raft of volcanic rock about the size of a city is headed towards Australia. It is believed to have come from an underwater volcano eruption and may help restore parts of the ailing Great Barrier Reef. CGTN's Greg Navarro explains.
As an Australian couple sailed through the South Pacific earlier this year, they encountered this.
As far as I could see, the sea had turned to this field of stone.
That stone is pumice from an underwater volcano that erupted near North Tonga. It initially formed a floating raft spanning 150 square kilometers. That's roughly the size of 20,000 football fields.
If we were standing on the beach, for example, looking at this pumice, it would go to the horizon. It's far denser.
Denser?
Yep.
Scott Bryant and Andrew Fletcher, both from Queensland University of Technology, are studying the raft and tracking its journey.
That's the pumice raft just there.
on a course for Australia's northeastern coast.
The pumice poses no real threat to people or the coastline here. Quite the opposite, in fact, because researchers believe that the billions of pieces of pumice that will survive this journey will make their way to the Great Barrier Reef, each serving as a vehicle for organisms to hitch a ride.
Just last month, Australia's government downgraded the health of the reef, which has lost half of its coral, to very poor.
This reef has suffered in the last few years 6 cyclones, 2 major coral bleaching events, and various attacks by the predator crown of thorns starfish. So, unsurprisingly, the outlook is that the condition has deteriorated.
So it's very well developed.
Brian says some of the pumice will be carrying pieces of new coral,
Bringing billions and millions of individuals in at once to be able to find a new home, add to the existing populations that are here that have suffered over the last few years through bleaching, cyclones in particular, just giving that extra boost of new numbers to help replenish and restore the reef.
The pumice raft continues to break up, which researchers say increases its chances of being dispersed along the Great Barrier Reef when it arrives next year. And while they stress it isn't a cure, they believe restocking some of the lost coral could help the reef to better cope with the threats it faces. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Brisbane.
And coming up in sports, neighbours Kenya and Uganda play out a 1-1 draw in an international friendly match in Nairobi.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
An inspired second-half performance by Kenya's Harambee Stars was not enough as they played out a 1-1 draw with visiting Uganda Cranes in an international friendly match played on Sunday at the Kasarani Stadium in Nairobi. Kenya was off colour in the first half and predictably went behind in the 23rd minute when Uganda's captain Emmanuel Okwi slotted in from a close range after a swift interchange of passes by the guests. Upon resumption, Kenya looked